Welcome to the second lesson of Unit 1. I remind you that all the unit is about advocacy and change. In the first lesson, we had a theoretical approach to change, a bit of an imaginary way of starting out. In this lesson, we start with implementing change. We will start at looking at the takeaways from this lesson. That will look like a bit of a tall menu, but we will synthesize everything into a nutshell. We would like you to get from this lesson a better understanding of change, which is the ultimate term goal of the advocacy we would like to work on. This is my favorite part, the preconditions, the milieu, the conditions on which we can work in order to allow our outcomes to happen. The context and understanding the milieu, again, it is an important word, and the short-term milestones or visions. The element of nothing taken for granted, so less assumptions and more interpretation of things. The activities for implementing change and how they lead to outcomes and the resources required to bring about those outcomes and to implement the activities. And then the outcomes themselves, the key results, the consequences of the activities implemented to achieve the change we would like to bring about. Let us take a quick technical look at implementing change. Change is our ultimate long-term goal, and this may often be in generic terms. But really, all missions are worded in this way. If not in generic terms, we may be thinking of results of activities rather than of ultimate long-term goals. So, if we are thinking of a mission, of an ultimate aim, we should be having generic terms, not specific ones in our mission. We need to look at the preconditions, the milieu. So, the conditions on which we can work on in order to allow our outcomes to happen. Is the terrain fertile? Has the topic or the problem that I have identified, has it been tackled before? How? By whom? When? With what results? Look at what others have done. It is always gold to learn from the successes and mistakes of others. Will there be resistance? From whom and why? The why is a very important part, as we shall see. Are there capacity issues regarding working towards change? Do I have the right capacity to do it before I start? It is like checking if you have fuel in your car before you embark on a journey. And let us talk about context, because our effort to start an advocacy campaign has to be done in a context, because nothing happens in a vacuum. Understanding the milieu and short-term milestones is a very important part of understanding one's context. Marx used to have a famous critique that philosophers have only sought to interpret the world, not to change it. We are the opposite. Campaigners have too often sought to change the world without first interpreting it enough. And this is where many campaigns, many advocacy efforts become waste of energy and unsuccessful, because they forgot to understand the context. First, we need to start from knowing ourselves and being aware of human nature in general. It helps our awareness that you cannot impose ideas on others. You cannot bang on the door and someone's mind opens to the problem you have identified. I like to use something with taste on our process of eating. And this is how we need to approach our audiences, so that we have a time to understand context. What do we do when we eat? We first ingest food, then we chew, and digestion, you should know, already starts with the chewing. Then we swallow, then we digest, and then we absorb. This is why, at times, it is easier for people to sell short-term goals or visions, because they can see them. They can see that they are something they can digest. Whereas if you approach with very big generic terms, they might look like too much to put into my mouth to eat at one go. And you might be knocking on doors that will close on you. When you understand the context and the milieu, you need to understand values. Another important element of understanding the context is beliefs and values. Nothing taken for granted means that we have less assumptions. We assume that everyone has my values. We assume that everyone has my beliefs. then you might be campaigning for yourself. You need to interpret and to understand the values and beliefs of others, the perceptions. The more interpretation there is, the more you can cater for resistance to change and to the argument you wish to put forward in your advocacy. And this happens at an individual level. If you want someone to work with you on a campaign, you have to understand the beliefs and values of that person. Organizational, if you want to understand the values and beliefs of your local council, of another organization that you might want to have as an ally, and in society, in your community as well. How people perceive and understand change and the world around them is infused by their underlying beliefs and values about life, human nature, and society. So, the perception of others helps. These beliefs are deep drivers of people's behavior and of the choices they make, and they are formed by different aspects of people's lives: class, education, gender, working conditions, context. So understanding the milieu and the milieu inside the minds of others and why persons decide and think in that way and not the other is an important study you need to take on before embarking on any campaign. Once we are implementing change, we are thinking of activities and how they lead to outcomes and the resources required for these activities. So, when one starts to implement change, one needs to map the activities to achieve your aim. One needs to define an outcome and how to get there. And these activities need to be planned in order to achieve these outcomes, even if they are not the major outcome of the campaign, but they are small milestones to achieve. And then you need to map the outcomes. And the mapping of the outcomes that you will generate, that will come out of the several activities, together they should form the mission or the achievement you want to achieve by your advocacy campaign. We spoke of missions having generic terms. When we are with aims of activities now, we are talking in specific terms. Actions are also in specific terms. The resources needed, how many persons we need, the timing, the costs, the logistics. This is why specific terms are very important. When you start planning activities, we are much less romantic because we have to count our shillings. The outcomes have to be presented to our allies in clear terms. And even if there are questionnaires to understand your community, these need to be very clear and with if-then kind of formulas. Then, when it comes to outcome mapping, we will think later, and I would like to show you an example of you need to have a logic frame or a logic framework. This word sometimes comes up when you are asking for funding. They ask you to present a logic frame of the activities you would like to have funded. The outcomes, which are in fact the successes. And here we stay on the logic frame. This is an example of a logical framework. First, we have the activities and the inputs. Then what these activities will produce, the outputs. Then the outcomes. And then the impacts. Keep in mind, vocabulary is very important, outcomes and outputs are often mistaken between each other. So, if I have an activity of organizing an event to bring awareness about a topic, the output is the event and the attendance and the participation. The outcome is that the participants are now more aware about the topic. The impact is that these persons who came for the event will go home and speak to their families and have an impact on themselves and on others. We need to have this logic framework as an important part of our planning. Examples. This is a Gantt chart. I'm sure all of you have seen this. And this is planning activities in the simple way, getting things organized. But this is not a logic framework. This is a logic framework. And the task that we will give you in the end of the lesson is a mini logic framework, an attempt at it. As you can see, there are the inputs, the activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. Sometimes a logic framework can have a bit of a different headings to the columns, but basically it is of what you want to do, what you will do to achieve it, what will be achieved, and the measurable result. Besides the logic framework, I sometimes prefer using a lean canvas. A canvas like this one is used often in startups of ideas or even of small businesses. A lean canvas is usually used when starting up a social enterprise. And if you are going to start an advocacy campaign, it could be good to use it. We will put a link at the forum under the lesson so that you can download it. The canvas gives you a hint of what should go in every box. And it should give you a clear picture of what your campaigning, of what your advocacy will look like and what results will it bring about. A review of this lesson. We spoke of implementing change and therefore about setting goals and putting them in context, and what can and would do in the context. When you are understanding your milieu, your context, you are calculating risks like resistance, competition, friends, enemies. We looked at nothing taken for granted, less assumptions of what people think, of what people have going on in their minds, and more interpretation, more understanding. We looked at concrete activities and how they are planned, and the objectives and results using a logic framework or using also a lean canvas. The lean canvas and the logic framework are an opportunity to build an evaluation strategy, because when you are thinking of results and outcomes of an activity, you are already setting yourself thresholds of what you should be achieving, and therefore you can measure the success or not. We would like you to have one small homework, which is identify one activity or one step in a larger activity that your local council or your organization implements, and carry out a bit of a reverse engineering. Put that activity on a mini logic frame, that we will have the link at the bottom of this lesson, and try to put what that activity, what was intended for that activity, what was the input, the objectives, the results, and the impact. It's a bit of reverse engineering, but it is good to evaluate something that is already being done. Thank you. See you in the forum.